Hello and welcome to our School at Home class in English Grade 10. We are in the fourth quarter of our set of lessons, and I hope everybody will delight in learning today with lesson number 8. Our topic is about using primary and secondary sources of information. For a start, do the following exercise. You can pause this video if you will need more time. Press play again when you're finished with the activity and when you're ready to proceed with the lesson. Let's have the pre-test. Read the following items carefully, then answer each item by choosing the letter of the correct answer. Write your answers in your notebook. Number 1. Primary source documents are all of the following except A. Analysis of events, B. First-hand accounts of someone's experience, C. An original document that does not analyze other documents. Number 2. Secondary source documents are all of the following except A. Original materials, B. Interpretations of original documents, C. An analysis of primary sources or events. Number 3. Which of these is not an example of a primary source? A. Diaries written at the time of an event, B. Original uniforms worn at a time in history, C. A poem about World War II from your classmate. Number 4. Which of these is not an example of a secondary source? A. Textbook, B. Diary entry, C. Newspaper articles. Number 5. What type of source is this? A diary titled Life in the Mines from a miner named Lucky Noah who lived in Idaho in the 1870s. A. Data, B. Primary, C. Secondary. Here are the correct answers. Number 1 is A, number 2 is A, number 3 is C, number 4 is B, and number 5 is D. Information comes from both primary and secondary sources. It is important to know the differences between the two. Primary sources provide raw information and first-hand evidence. Examples include interview transcripts, statistical data, and works of art. A primary source gives you direct access to the subject of your research. If you are researching something current, your primary sources can either be qualitative or quantitative data that you collect yourself. Examples: interviews, surveys, experiments, or sources produced by people directly involved in the topic. For example, official documents or media texts. Primary sources are the foundation of original research. They allow you to make new discoveries, provide credible evidence for your arguments, and give authoritative information about your topic. Another source of information is what we call secondary sources. Secondary sources provide second-hand information and commentary from other researchers. Examples include journal articles, reviews, and academic books. A secondary source describes, interprets, or synthesizes primary sources. Primary sources are more credible as evidence, but good research uses both primary and secondary sources. What are secondary sources for? Secondary sources are good for gaining a full overview of your topic and understanding how other researchers have approached it. They often synthesize a large number of primary sources that would be difficult and time-consuming to gather by yourself. Secondary sources allow you to gain background information on the topic, support or contrast your arguments with other researchers' ideas, and gather information from primary sources that you can't access directly. For example, private letters or physical documents located elsewhere. Remember that all primary and secondary sources must be correctly cited to avoid plagiarism. Here are some examples of primary and secondary sources that you can familiarize yourself with. To determine if something can be used as a primary or secondary source in your research, there are some simple questions you can ask yourself. Does this source come from someone directly involved in the events I'm studying, or from another researcher? Am I interested in analyzing the source itself, or only using it for background information? Does the source provide original information, or does it comment upon information from other sources? Let's have the guided practice. You're writing a research paper on the problem of homelessness in your town or city. Which of the following sources would be a primary source for you, and which would be a secondary source? Number 1. A report from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, Drifting Apart, New Findings on Growing Income Disparities Between the Rich, the Poor, and the Middle Class, 1990. This is analyzing and interpreting data from a secondary source. Number 2. An interview with 2 homeless persons in your town. This is analyzing and interpreting data from a primary source because these sources have first-hand knowledge of or raw data on your topic. Number 3. A book entitled The Undeserving Poor, From the War on Poverty to the War on Welfare by Michael Katz, 1989. This is analyzing and interpreting data from a secondary source. Number 4. An article entitled The Culture of Poverty on Understanding Poverty, Perspectives from the Social Sciences. This is analyzing and interpreting data from a secondary source. Number 5. A book by Karl Marx entitled Capital, A Critique of Political Economy, 1887. This is analyzing and interpreting data from a secondary source. Let us have some exercises for further understanding. Activity 1. Determine if the source would be a primary source, write P, or a secondary source, write S. Write your answers in your notebook. Number 1. A biography about Jose Rizal. Number 2. A history book describing the life of the Filipinos during the Japanese regime. Number 3. A TV show explaining what happened in Maguindanao. Number 4. Ferdinand Marcos's diary describing what he thought about his political career. Number 5. A Filipino veteran talking about the war in the Philippines. Activity 2. Evaluate and label each image as primary or secondary source. Explain your answers. Number 1. A copy of Deped Order Number 1 series of 2021. Number 2. COVID-19 cases monitoring report posted on Facebook by Pasig PIO. Number 3. A news report on a survey on COVID-19 vaccine conducted by pollster Pulse Asia. Number 4. We Can Be Heroes movie review. Number 5. Documentary of Howie Severino as a COVID-19 patient. Let's have activity 3. Fill the chart below of titles as examples of primary and secondary sources. To wrap up what we have discussed today, write down 3 things you have remembered, 2 examples of what you have learned, and 1 question you have about the lesson in your notebook. For the valuing, in your notebook, write down the importance of using primary and secondary sources in your life as a student. Time to check what you have learned. Answer now your post-test. Choose the correct answer to the following questions. Write the letter of the correct answer in your notebook. Number 1. What is a primary source? Letter A source used often. Letter B, a source created after an event has happened. Letter C, a source created at the time of an event by an individual who was there. Number 2. What is a secondary source? Letter A, a source which is someone's first choice to use for research. Letter B, a source which is someone's second choice to use for research. Letter C, a source created after an event has happened by someone not present at the event. Number 3. Which of the following is a secondary source? Letter A, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Letter B, a textbook chapter on World War II and its famous battles. Letter C, a photograph of an immigrant family arriving at Ellis Island. Number 4. When researching, you do not have to say where you got your information from. Letter A, true. Letter B, false. Letter C, maybe. Number 5. Joaquin Bernas was one of the commissioners who wrote the Philippine Constitution. The Constitution is letter A, primary source, B, secondary source, C, statistical data. Here are the correct answers. Number 1 is C, number 2 is C, number 3 is B, number 4 is B, and number 5 is A. And that ends our lesson today. I hope you learned when and how to use primary and secondary sources. Goodbye!